Hello, World Civ 106. We are in week 15, and we're just about done, which is awesome. And I'm also sad because I really enjoy this class, and I always enjoy each semester and the students that I have. So let's see. What do I want to say? Okay, there's several things I want to mention, but before I forget, there was one point that I make in the Sikhism lectures that I had a student from last semester, and I just remembered this literally like last night while I'm laying down. He was like, "Hey, Professor Pollock, I have kind of one issue with the way that you articulated what you did in the Sikhism lectures," and he pointed out that what I stated is pretty much what is in most textbooks. So he was telling me, like reassuring me, "Mr. Pollock, it's understandable that you misrepresented Sikhism slightly, because everybody does, but I, as a person practicing this religion that was born and raised, want to clarify a very important particular thing." And it was talking about the concept of ikunkar, one God, God being everything. And instead of actually trying to tell you give you the more precise, like the real, to say that I'm telling you what that actually means, what I want to point out is what it seems to me that he was saying in this discussion. That sounds very similar to Islam when they say in the Quran it says Allah Ahad, God is one, okay, or he's Wahid, one also. And there's a verse in the Quran that basically says, I think it actually says, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember the Arabic, but it says that God is as close to the human as the jugular on your neck. And the idea is that God is really noticing you and this conversation and everything like that. And in Christianity, the same thing. You know, Jesus says every hair on the head, every hair on your head, if you have hair, right, is counted, and that God notices every fallen sparrow. That God is really totally just watching everything in full detail, and that the concept of ikunkar, that God is one, that basically God is everything, is more, it's not the idea that God is actually listening to this conversation, that God is everything, that life, the universe is God, and that it's more maybe similar to some of the mystical ideas where it's like when I'm in Thailand and I was talking to my cousin's wife about when she's praying to Buddha, she doesn't see Buddha as a god. So I was like, well, what do you see is happening within this process, right? And so it's a little less concrete. And so I guess I just want to say this, is that I feel like I'm still not fully articulating this maybe the way that he would have liked, but it's a much more mystical, and it's not the idea of one God that's actually acting like a full observer in everything that's taking place, which is very similar to what really Christianity and Islam does. And Judaism gets a little ambiguous on that as well. And so, just reminding you as we go through this class, also when you think back of even the way that Tian in China, right, heaven, and the concepts in the Far East of what we could say God, but when we often talk about God in the West with a Christian tradition or perhaps a Muslim tradition, we do think about God being this, like, watching us all right now. And this is apparently really not the case with a lot of other religions, and we have to really stop and acknowledge that, okay? So, having said that, move on to the next point, which is, as you're looking at your grades, because we're getting close to the end of this semester, that if you look in your grade book, you'll see all these assignments that I didn't assign you, and you might freak out. Well, don't freak out and don't do anything with them. Don't put anything, don't mess with them. Canvas, for whatever reason, keeps all of my old assignments, even if I changed up my arrangements. And it's all in the gradebook, but it doesn't matter as long as you don't put anything in there, or I. So we just leave them alone, okay? So, what you do want to do is make sure that there is a grade for every assignment that was given to you in each week's module. Every once in a while, another glitch with Canvas is if you don't turn an assignment, I should be able to see that and give you a 0, and then you get your grade. But every once in a while, you don't do an assignment, I don't see that you did not do it, and I don't put anything in. And what happens is when I'm doing the gradebook at the end, I have to take a look and I'm saying, oh my gosh, this is basically an ungraded assignment. And I got to put the 0 in, and it'll drop your grade. Now, if you have a very high grade and you're not on the cusp of between a B or an A or B and the C and so forth, I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you are on the cusp, it's the cat keeps coming back. Anyways, so if you're on the cusp, your grade, when you're checking it, double check and make sure that all your assignments have been graded from the past, but don't try to fix anything yourself. Email me and let me know if you notice anything, okay? But I wouldn't stress about it too much. Just something I just want to say to notice. It usually doesn't drop so much either. The final will come up next week. It's not going to be that hard, but we'll talk about that later. For now, just to say, you have thoroughly covered quite a bit of material. Maybe thorough is the end. I shouldn't say thorough. You have had a taste of the world, and you now know what the Ottoman Empire was. So important to understand. As I mentioned, if you studied the Cold War, if you study what's happened in America and in Europe and the whole world in the West, and you didn't know what the Cold War was, and you didn't understand what the Soviet Union was, and you didn't understand Marxism, you're not going to understand so many things. And by the way, if you don't understand what I'm saying, make that your next personal goal, okay? If you can't take it into class. What was the Soviet Union? What was that all about? What was Marxism all about? Marxist-Leninism all about? Okay, the Ottoman Empire was that big ideological and demographic challenge and that militaristic challenge. It was, the Western world looked at the Ottoman Empire and said, okay, whoa, there's that. But then you'll also see, and you'll see this later on, and this is something that I always want my students to never fall prey to. To think that there's this ideological battle always between Christianity and Islam or some nonsense like that. I'll just give you a quick example and I'm going to end this. But there was something called the Crimean War. And it's in the 19th century, that's why I didn't cover it. And it's when the Russians claimed to intervene on behalf of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. And what ends up happening is that Western Europe was more afraid of the lack of balance of power going into Russia's favor than they were worried about Islamic Turkey, the Ottoman Empire. So, believe it or not, the British and the French make an alliance with the Ottoman Empire to fight and push back Russian advances within the Islamic domain. Okay? So, what that should always show you is that balance of power and all those things are more important to national leaders than the ideological and the theological things that they usually use to rally us up, to get us whipped up into trying to do for whatever their adventures are going to be. Every once in a while you have an event like that really makes it's so obvious how these ideologies are essentially used for us as most of the time, but when push comes to shove, when we're talking about these other things, that all that other stuff gets pushed aside. And what it also shows you is that the Western Europe has been often more fearful and pushing Russia at a distance than other empires like the Muslim world. And also, keep in mind that the Ottoman Empire, and I hope you might have caught this in one of my lectures, actually gave some support to Protestant nobles fighting off Catholics in Europe. And why is that? Well, come on. See, there's so much stuff to study. There's so much things to understand. But my whole point is I hope that you'll always keep remembering, as the topic of religion comes up, don't forget that it's not that religion is always using states and manipulating people. It's often states using religions to manipulate people for their state interests, their monarchical interests, you feel me? Okay, I'll end it there. If you have any questions, any more thoughts, just get a hold of me. Otherwise, have a great week, and we'll be in touch.